Week 12 in college football has us looking at some great rivalry matchups, including the USC-UCLA game, which we'll zero in on with special guest Ryan Abraham, publisher of USCFootball.com. Later on, we'll do our usual look around the rest of Week 12's action with the latest trends, injury news, odds, and picks as OFN College Football Preview on the Ourlads Football Radio Network starts now. All right, thanks for tuning in to another edition of OFN College Football Preview here on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. We've got a lot of games to cover. Maybe not the big games like we had last week, but we've got some good rivalry games for this Friday, the 17th of November, 2017. And so before we get into all the other games and let you know what's going on there, let's go ahead and start with, I think, again, this week, as far as rivalries, is probably not a rivalry game that should grab your attention more than USC-UCLA. May not have the cash that it had some years ago, but then again, it's still for the USC-UCLA fans, for the West Coast fans, and I would hope, of course, for diehard college football fans everywhere, it would still grab your attention, and it certainly grabs mine. That's why I wanted to have Ryan Abraham on the show. And Ryan, thanks for taking your time to talk to us today.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, it's the most important weekend in college football, at least here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and I was actually kind of happy to see that on the networks, the two games that they're going to have on Saturday night will both be the two Pac-12 rivalry games, USC-UCLA and Cal-Stanford. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if you could watch them both and you don't have to switch back and forth. But, the Pac-12 has done some strange scheduling stuff, TV stuff over the years. But it's USC is the highest ranked Pac-12 team, number 11 in the college football playoff poll, and UCLA is 5-5 and trying to make a bowl game. But it's unique where both teams get to wear their home uniforms and all that. So there's a lot of just seeing two teams in the same city. That's what the uniqueness about this. You don't really see that anywhere else.
How is the rivalry nowadays compared to what you remember it, even just 10 or 20 years ago?
Yeah, I know USC's won the last couple. UCLA had a good run with Brett Hundley a few years ago. It's one of those things that's from the USC side. I think John McKay said it best, where it's like there's no better feeling than beating Notre Dame, but it's nothing worse than losing to UCLA. So when USC fans beat UCLA, it's fine. You just don't want to lose to them. They just don't want to be in the same city at the same time. So we'll see. I think Clay Helton, it's really important to get this win for Clay Helton because he did already lose, in embarrassing fashion to Notre Dame. So you don't want to go 0-2 in the big rivals because fans really can turn on you quickly.
Well, how is that going? I mean, a lot of people, I'm sure, were a little bit skeptical when Helton was hired. So such a big job opportunity. He didn't have that big fancy name, and he's been there for a few years already. The team's won. So there's that. They have gotten off to slow starts the last couple of years, even though last year they went on a nice winning streak to end the season. That's what everybody got excited about this season. And then right off the bats, they were sluggish. And really that sluggish game to start the season against Western Michigan, even though they won games early on, especially the Texas overtime game as a huge favorite, people really started to wonder, okay, are they going to snap out of this? And really it didn't seem like they snapped out of it until after they lost to Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And it's funny that, we get the pulses of fans on, Twitter and on our message boards and stuff. And there's still a lot of people that just don't think he should have been hired. They don't really like the way the program's going. They're not beating people badly enough. But I think when you look at the actual facts that, they're 9-2 with a good chance to go 10-2 this season. They're going to represent the South. And, if they win and they go 11-2 in the Pac-12 championship game, and you're likely in like the Fiesta Bowl. And so if you do something like that back to back, you win the Rose Bowl one year. I mean, UCLA hasn't won the Rose Bowl since before, the Czech Republic was an actual country. I mean, it's been a long time. USC stumbles out to a 1-3 start last year and wins the Rose Bowl. So I think those things are important. But a lot of the fans they don't seem to be on board yet. So I think if it's another year where they win another New Year's Six type of bowl, maybe more people will come on board. But there's still a mixed bag. There's still kind of this wait and see attitude where they didn't really want to hire Clay Helton to begin with. And so until he really proves that this team is back and can compete to make the playoff, they're just always going to be skeptical about it.
What do you think about what is going on over at UCLA? Because even a few years ago when Jim Mora got off to a good start, I was always myself a little bit unsure. I mean, started hearing, oh, well, maybe Jim Mora is going to get another job as a head coach in the NFL. I mean, I never really bought into that. I mean, I think Jim Mora is probably where he belongs as far as a college head coach, and he did a good job early on recruiting, and of course we know that's what you have to do. But I don't know, maybe it's because he's lost some talent early the last few years. It's kind of hurt him this year, and they've taken some steps back. But they've struggled the last couple of years. What's going on over there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think sometimes you get a defensive-minded coach. I think it can work for sure. But when you hire a really inexperienced offensive coordinator like he did with Kenny Palomalo last year,
okay,
it just kind of takes things off the rails. So you got a generational talent like Josh Rosen with 3 different offensive coordinators. You needed to get someone like a Jed Fish a couple of years ago and get some consistencies there. So I think that's part of the problem. But man, if you look at them this year, they're one of the worst teams we've ever seen as far as run defense goes. They're averaging giving up 300 yards rushing per game. If that continues for the rest of the season, no team's done that in the last 15 years. So that's not even an offensive problem. That's a defensive problem. But he's got a big buyout. I know there's a lot of pressure on Dan Guerrero. They're flying signs around the Rose Bowl that they want to get rid of Jim Mora. I just don't see it happening unless maybe they go 0 for 2 these last 2 games and get blown out or something. It just seems like they've done some good things there, but they haven't been able to get over that hump. But I think it starts with sometimes defensive-minded coaches meddle too much with the offense. Just get a really good offensive coordinator, let them run things. I think they got that with Jed Fish now, but it might be a little too late.
All right. Well, what about this quarterback matchup? Everybody's talking about it, of course. Dan Shanka from Ourlads, our scouting guru, he went ahead and did some profiles on both quarterbacks earlier this week. So that's available on demand for anybody out there that wants to listen to what he said about both quarterbacks. He has Josh Rosen, and he right now is his top quarterback for the draft. That includes Sam Darnold. And part of the reason, I mean, even early on, I'll tell you, Dan was very skeptical about Sam even before the season began. When everybody was high on him, he thought he needed some more seasoning. And even now, I think there's still a lot of people in the national media that believe that, okay, well, Sam seems to be figuring things out. Maybe he'll still be the first pick in the draft if he decides to come out. Where are you on that comparison? And where are you on whether or not you think Sam would be better served coming back, and whether or not you do think he will come back?
Yeah, I think Rosen I've always had as my top pick of the guys coming out. I think he just looks more like a traditional NFL quarterback. He can make the throws, and I think you saw some. People question his heart, and you saw him like in the Texas A&M game and other games like that, where he can carry a team on his back. And I think if you were to look at attributes of these two guys, they're similar. Both of these teams are capable of taking over games. If you look like at a Jake Browning at Washington, he'll have some good stats and stuff, but I just haven't really seen him in a game where, hey, things aren't going right. You're not on schedule. All these things are and the quarterback just says, okay, I'm taking over. Rosen can do that. Darnold can do that. And I think they'll both end up being very high picks. Darnold, certainly the turnovers were a detriment this season. This last game against Colorado was the first time he didn't turn the ball over all year. But he did fumble it once, and it bounced right back to him. So I think that's probably one of the questions. I think it's, they're both going to be really high picks in my estimation. My gut feeling now is that I would guess that Darnold comes back. I don't think he's decided. People are saying, my sources say that. I don't think he thinks he knows what he's going to do at this point. But my guess would be he ends up coming back. But obviously it wouldn't shock me if he left for the NFL too.
And what do you think he needs to do, by the way, to improve himself? Have you noticed anything in particular that you go, yeah, I've kind of seen him. That's a bad habit. He really better improve upon that at the next level.
Yeah, I think some of the with the turnover stuff, I think he can get a little loose with the ball, and I think sometimes he's just trying to make a big play, but you don't want to limit it too much because that's a lot of what makes him special is that he does sense the pass rush really well. And I think, he got banged up, and I think he wasn't able to escape some of the pass rush like he was last year and get the ball down the field. But his really best attribute, I think, is when he gets away from the pass rush, it's not like he runs out of bounds and picks up 2 yards, so you avoided a sack and you pick up a little bit. He would avoid the sack and then pick up a chunk play down the field. And I think when he wasn't as mobile and maybe hobbled a little bit, he was trying to do that and getting more sacks and turning the ball over. So I think just maybe not doing too much, but you don't want to limit him because his creativity really is one of his best attributes. So probably just kind of clean that up a little bit. But he has got good arm strength, probably not as good as Rosen, but he has really good vision down the field, and to be able to make a play after things break down is a pretty cool aspect of his game.
All right. What about the injuries? Because the injuries have played a big role for USC this year, especially on defense. And matter of fact, one of the players that you lost for the season is, I believe, the latest Ourlads had him ranked as the 7th senior offensive guard for the draft. And is it how do you pronounce his name?
Talamaivo, yeah.
I'll let you do that.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about him, his situation, and of course also, and then we'll get into some of the other players on offense that may be coming out for the draft.
Sure, yeah. So they coming out of last year, they had to replace 3 offensive linemen. So I think they felt pretty good about the starting group. But like Vianney Talavaiva, like the right guard, he ended up being lost for the season. And so you're starting a true freshman, Andrew Voorhees, in his spot. Now they've played 2 true freshmen on the offensive line and kind of moved guys around. The peak was they lost 3 offensive linemen for the Washington State game on that Friday night where they ended up losing. I think that was really the killer. But since then, I think they've been pretty solid coming out. The same 5 guys have been there the last several games. I think it's been important. Certainly they've lost some guys on the defensive side, and another true freshman, Marlon Tuipulotu, was a defensive tackle. They were pretty thin on the defensive front, and I think losing him hurt. They've been without Iman Marshall, their starting quarterback, for the last couple of games. There's a good chance he comes back in this one. And really, Porter Gustin was their best pass rusher, and he had surgery 4 days before the Texas game, and on his foot, he had screws inserted into his toe, and they still played him somehow, and he ended up bleeding through his shoe, and then he missed everything until a couple of games ago, came back in, played against Arizona State, and then we haven't seen him since. So they've really been without his services most of the time. So I think they're fairly healthy now. I think the middle of the season when they had no bye week is when it really got bad. That Washington State game probably was the worst.
Yeah, so Gustin, by the way, the number 4 ranked underclass prospect for defensive ends at Ourlads. Let's stick on offense. And Ronald Jones, who just looks like a tremendous player, number 3 rated underclass running back for Ourlads. Do you think he goes out, and how does he compare? I mean, he looks to me like another Reggie Bush.
Yeah, maybe not as elusive as a Reggie Bush. I think it's been really helpful having Dylan McCullough, the new running back coach, come in and change his body. I think they put a few more pounds on him. He's a stronger guy. They really focus on running through trash, which means like getting yards after contact. And he's been an absolute beast if you look at his yards after contact numbers and breaking tackles and running away from guys. We call him like the Texas Tesla. You see him get in the open, and he's just blowing by people. It's really helped. I think they brought in McCullough from Indiana. It's just been great for the running back room. None of those guys fumble. Their ball security is great. They've been good at pass blocking, but obviously you want to see running. And he's been the workhorse. And he had Stephen Carr, who was a 5-star freshman, kind of alongside him. That was helping out. He's been out the last couple of games. I think for Jones, the one thing, he's not the best as far as catching passes. I think he's got better. Okay. But, man, he just has a complete game when it comes to being a running back. And so many times he's hitting the backfield on short yardage situations, and the only reason they pick up the play is because he makes somebody miss and gets the first down. So he's been invaluable for this USC team, and I kind of think he will declare for the draft. I think he's moving up all the charts as far as passing, like big name players like Mike Garrett, things like that, like on the all-time USC rushing list. All those Heismans and stuff. He's passed a bunch of those guys already. So I kind of think he'll end up coming out.
And then Stephen Carr becomes the number 1 back next year, right?
I would think so. They like some of the other guys, Vavai, Malapai, and Akacentric Ware has been doing pretty well. But Stephen Carr is just electric, and it's a shame he's been hurt. Just to see him playing as a true freshman, he's awesome. He's like a wide receiver as far as catching the ball out of the backfield. So he's an absolute weapon back there in a different way.
All right, now on defense, Cameron Smith, Ourlad, number 1 ranked inside linebacker for underclassmen. And then also Nwosu is a top prospect, top 15 prospect overall for senior outside linebackers. So what about those 2 linebackers, especially Cameron Smith? Because, it seems like we've been talking about him forever.
Yeah, so I'll go with Nwosu first. I think he's batted 11 passes down this year. I mean, it's crazy for a linebacker. He's been great, a stud. I think the coaches we're really calling him out before the season, telling the scouts, like, hey, this is a guy to watch for. I think he's certainly helped himself as a senior. Cameron Smith, he's not going to have the measurables that a lot of the guys have. He's not going to be, running the fastest 40 and, vertical leap and all that kind of stuff. But he's been USC's most consistent tackler. All the different rating systems, I think he's, rated one of the highest as far as not, having guys go through his tackles and things like that. And really has helped out especially when the defensive line was bagged up. He's filled in some of those holes and stopped plays before they could really get rolling. So I think he's been invaluable as a captain for USC. My guess would be he wasn't really even thinking about it, but my guess would be he comes back just because he's not one of those dudes that's just like, 6'5" and runs like a deer and things like that. He's just been a really solid college middle linebacker, and I think he can probably help himself coming back for one more year.
All right. And then at corner is Inman Marshall, the number 5 underclass prospect at corner for Ourlads. How's his season been, and how does he compare to some of the other top defensive backs that have come out of USC the last few years?
Yeah, his plan, because he was a 5-star guy coming out of Long Beach Poly, his plan was a 3-year plan, and he's played as a freshman, he's played as a sophomore. Got banged up this year, and there have been a lot of penalties. There have been instances where he gets burned and beat deep. I know the plan was for him to come out after 3 years. I'm not sure if it's what's best for him. And a lot of people talk about him maybe switching to safety because he's a bigger guy. His nickname is Biggie. I could see him coming back for a senior year and switching to safety. We'll see, kind of see what happens there. But he's not going to have the tape that you're going to look at him and say, oh yeah, this is a guy that we need. I mean, there's a lot of really good corners in the Pac-12, and I don't think you can compare him to some of those guys right now. So he's got to clean up a lot of stuff, I would think, in there. Now, I know his plan was to come out, but my guess right now is he's going to stay in school for one more year.
All right. Any other players that we should be keeping an eye on that I haven't mentioned, either for the draft or possibly a little bit later on down the road, like some freshmen or sophomores?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of guys. I think Toa Lobendon, who's playing left tackle for USC, he could come out. He could declare, but he's sort of undersized to be playing left tackle right now. They just needed somebody there. I kind of think he'll switch back to the center position where he feels comfortable and maybe kind of come out there. And one guy to watch is Tyler Vaughns. I think Deontay Burnett has been a great wide receiver for USC, but a redshirt freshman, Tyler Vaughns, has been absolutely spectacular. They didn't start him at the beginning of the season, and I have no idea why. You'll never convince me he shouldn't have been the guy out there, but he started, I think, starting game 4 or 5, and he's been a great player ever since. He's a guy, because he redshirted his freshman year. After next year, people will be talking about him potentially coming out. He's just going to be one of those. A lot of USC receivers in the NFL right now. I think he could be one of the next really good ones.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye on him for sure. Now, you're a Heisman voter, right?
I am, yes.
Okay, so is the Heisman race over? Has Baker Mayfield won it in your minds, or do you still need a couple more weeks to figure it out?
I like to wait till the end and try to figure it out. I'll definitely track guys and see where they go. It looks, like Mayfield has really impressive resume, and I like that there's been a resurgence of running backs though, and to see a guy like Khalil Tate, emerge, man, he's spectacular. I covered him when he was in high school at Sarah High School, and it's crazy. So I think that someone could still make a run, and who knows, Mayfield could fall on his face. But right now he's the leader in the clubhouse. But I think still there's a lot of football left to play.
All right. Now I did want to ask you about you got some former coaches that are making news. Lane Kiffin, of course, is doing a heck of a job transforming the program at FAU. It looks like he's going to go to the conference championship game, maybe even win the conference in his first year down there. So great opportunity for him. Very smart move. Do you think that eventually from what you know from him, that he's eventually going to kind of mature and find a place as a coach somewhere, either in the college ranks or the NFL ranks, and have a nice rest of his career?
Yeah, I kind of think so. You thought that after getting fired on the tarmac, it would be really impossible to rebuild his career, but he's a smart guy, and going to Nick Saban and being yelled at on the sidelines and winning a national championship, and then getting ousted like right before they lost another championship, get replaced by Steve Sarkisian. So many crazy things with Lane Kiffin, and I know he wanted a good head coaching job, and really FAU was the the best he could get, but he's made them relevant. And I think when you look at a program, you want to be relevant, and that's what Lane Kiffin can do. Really turning that program around, picking up guys that were cast off of other places, coaches that were cast off. And his Twitter game is amazing right now. You have to follow him on Twitter just to see what's going on. And my wife is she's a Tennessee grad and a huge fan. And that fan base hated his guts after he left for USC. They're at the point now that, if they don't get John Gruden, which that's what they're all hoping for, they would welcome Lane Kiffin back.
Wow.
Like, that's how much it's crazy what he's been able to do. I didn't think it could happen this quickly, but he's rebuilding his reputation. I think he's probably matured a little bit as a head coach too, and that's helped. But it's nuts to see how he's able to do that. He was so young, when he got his first head coaching job. So you can only learn. I think he's probably still going to do Lane Kiffin things, but I think he's certainly learning and is poised to get another bigger job.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is I think people because of of how things ended for him at USC, that people kind of thought that sometimes you get that lasting impression sometimes, but he had some winning there. So I don't know if people realize that it wasn't all bad at USC.
Yeah, he was 10-2 in 2011, and that's part of the downfall was that they were under sanctions and they couldn't go to the postseason, so they couldn't represent the Pac-12 and the championship game and all of that. And so they were preseason like number one, had the number one recruiting class. Then they imploded and they went 7-6 and lost a bunch of the guys on signing day and all that kind of stuff. So it was a really high and then a really low, followed by a bad season. Then obviously getting fired on the tarmac, but he's rebuilt that reputation, and at least he didn't have the kind of off the field things like a Steve Sarkisian did. So at least that was one positive thing for him.
Well, that's actually also what I wanted to ask you about, because were you surprised that Sarkisian got the Alabama job and then got the Atlanta job? Sometimes when you have some of those personal issues, it usually takes a little while. I mean, look at Kiffin. I mean, and Sarkisian. I mean, those are some problems that he dealt with, as you know. Were you surprised? Because I was really shocked that he got the Atlanta job.
I was shocked at that. I mean, Saban bringing him in, I think it shows the power of his program. You look like the support staff is really like where this war is going on, and if you're like a Nick Saban, and you can bring in former USC head coaches to be like support staff people, that just shows like, look, we're a big deal. And, Sark was kind of a good fit there. He's, 0-1 as offensive coordinator for Alabama, but he still gets hired for Atlanta. And their offense hasn't been all that great this year. So I'm a little surprised by some of that. But I think Saban does that strategically. Like, he can take your former head coach and put him on like the support staff. He's not even a full-time assistant. That's just what they just have this machine rolling right now. They can pretty much do whatever they want.
All right. Is there a particular team that you would like to see USC face in the Pac-12 championship game for any particular reason?
I think the toughest matchup would probably be Stanford, even though USC's already beat Stanford. I'd like to see Washington again, since that's a team they haven't played. But I think they match up pretty well. It's a great Washington defense, but even when they played on the road last year in Seattle, USC pretty much dominated that game. But a lot of USC fans, I think, would like to see Washington State because they want to get a little bit of revenge from early in the season. USC went up there on a short week on a Friday night. Well, Washington State would have to come back short week on a Friday night following a road game. So I think that's what a lot of USC fans would like to see.
All right. So, hopefully at some point, a little bit later on down the road, of course, you're going to have the Pac-12 championship game. And then after that, hopefully for USC fans, a big bowl game. And then, of course, we'll wait and see what happens with Sam Darnold. So hopefully we'll get another opportunity real soon to talk to you, Ryan. And we want to thank you very much for taking time out of the day to talk to us.
Oh, anytime. Thanks so much. And we'll talk to you. Whenever you need me, just give me a call down the road. I'll be around.
I appreciate that, Ryan. Good luck this weekend.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you. All right. So that's Ryan Abraham. Again, he is the publisher of USCFootball.com. USC. Just remember where they were. The beginning of the season, everybody talking about USC as a national champion. I mean, they were one of the favorites. And then all of a sudden, it's amazing how things just change. And remember, they were winning too earlier in the season. It's not like they lost. Don't forget, it wasn't like they were losing games early in the season. they just were. They weren't. It's something because I'm sure you. I mean, not. I'm sure, of course, USC would take the ugly losses now. I mean, the ugly wins now. But early on in the season, it was like, yeah, but we got higher expectations. We got to start playing better than this. And then and then they started losing, and it was like, wow, what's going on here? Now the Washington State game, you could probably go, all right, maybe that'll wake them up. And tell you the truth, I picked Washington State in that game. So I wasn't shocked, but I also thought that maybe they'd wake up after that, still run the table, and maybe compete for a national championship. So I didn't think that loss would kill them. And you know what? They came back and won a few games after that until the Notre Dame game. So look, they've only lost twice. They are hanging in there if crazy things happen as far as a playoff spot. And a lot of crazy things have happened. But the expectations are definitely a lot higher. And if they can bring Cameron Smith back and they can bring Sam Darnold back, and look, there's talent there. There's always going to be talent there at receiver and in the backfield for USC. So you would think that as long as Darnold comes back, they would be fine on offense. And maybe if they're healthier next year, maybe that's what Darnold also says. Hey, I don't need the money in the draft. Let me go ahead and try to win a championship here. Maybe some of that also depends on if he goes, you know what, I am thinking about it. All right, where am I supposed to go? Because I would think that maybe should have something to do with it. Because if somebody tells him, you know what, I don't know, maybe it's possible you're going to go somewhere in the middle of the first round. I don't see that happening. I know that's where Dan Chonka rates him, but Dan knows better than anybody that you can rate players, especially quarterbacks, more than anything at a specific area in the draft, but they're always going to be overdrafted. So if Sam Darnold, if Dan thinks he's like the 17th top player in the entire draft, that in the real world of the NFL, a quarterback starved NFL, he's going to go in the top 10. I mean, it's going to lock that he'll be a top 10 pick. Now, the question is, does he go, well, maybe I'll be behind Rosen. I don't know if Josh Allen will beat me out. So, yeah, maybe the third quarterback, could be the first, maybe the third. But you know what? If I come back next year, I will be the first. That's for sure. If I come back next year, I'll be the first. Maybe I can win a national championship. Again, I don't need the money. So maybe that's what he does. But we'll see. Okay, by the way, UCLA has lost all five games on the road this year. We've talked about that before, which is why I have gone against UCLA in just every one of those situations. Now, I'm a little bit torn here, though, because of the fact it's the rivalry game. Not necessarily because UCLA needs the win for bowl eligibility, which they do. But they could get that next Friday when they host California. They've also lost 9 straight road games. And as Ryan mentioned, the last 2 against USC by a 76-35 margin, by the way. Meanwhile, USC's won 5 out of 6. They're 2-0-1 ATS last 3. So USC seems to be playing their best ball of the year. And UCLA can't win on the road. They haven't been able to beat USC. Don't forget, Rosen didn't play last year in this game because he was hurt, had the shoulder injury. So, I tell you the truth, I'm usually, I don't go against my trends, but if I ever do, this is when I do. That's why I always say I never use the trends 100% of the time. I always use them like 75 to 85%. And these are some of the circumstances I won't use them. That I'm thinking maybe I'll go with UCLA. I don't know if I would take them straight out money line. I'm not going to sit here and tell you today that I'm taking UCLA to win this game. I would think USC would find a way to win it. But I get the feeling, 16 points, a lot of points. I could see UCLA making this a fun game. A Rosen, Darnold last, because Rosen's probably gone. And Darnold may be gone too. So I think this is going to be one of those games. Now, what you could see is Sam Darnold and USC scoring 21 fourth quarter points and outscoring UCLA by 14 in the fourth quarter and covering by whatever, a couple of points there late. I could see that happening because I don't anticipate UCLA stopping USC at all. But I don't know. I get a little bit of a feeling that Josh Rosen has a big game and keeps it close. Let's stick in the Pac-12 to talk about some games because there's a lot of news going on. there's some interesting things happening as far as key injuries, and what we're gonna do is here. I'm gonna try to do this as fast as possible, get through these as fast as we can. I'm going to go through every conference, and I'm going to let you know what the teams need in their games as far as bowl eligibility, conference championships, and all that kind of stuff. So let's get quickly through it. Pac-12, we'll start there. Oregon, it looks like they're going to get Herbert back in the game against Arizona. That's why they're a 2.5-point favorite at home against Arizona. We talked about Tate. And what a great player he's been for about a month here, maybe even more, because they're 5-1 with Tate. The only loss to USC. Oregon needs the win this week or next week against Oregon State for bowl eligibility. This is tough for me because I got to believe for sure that Herbert's going to play. They're 1-4. Most of those losses without Herbert. I would take Arizona if I was unsure about Herbert. I would definitely take Arizona if I knew Herbert wouldn't play that game on Saturday night. But if Herbert plays, I don't know. I mean, I would think it over. But considering I've gone with Arizona just about every game that Tate's been there, I'll probably either take Arizona or stay away from the game. Arizona State, meanwhile, at Oregon State. Arizona State either needs to win against Oregon State, which they better because they only have a win, the Beavers, or next week versus arch rival Arizona to be bowl eligible. Arizona State's a 7-point favorite in that game. I think that's a pretty safe bet. I mean, Oregon State's had a pretty bad season. And as soon as the coaching change went off, they were a bit competitive there for a little bit. But now I think, it's getting back to being real. They're just not a very good team. Also in the Pac-12, the big game, Cal-Stanford. Stanford favored by 15.5 points. That's the thing about the two games on Saturday night we talked about. Both of them are 16-point spreads, basically. Stanford has won 7 straight against Cal. They've won 6 out of 7 overall. Cal, meanwhile, first big game for Justin Wilcox. And Cal hasn't really been the same either ever since they lost Downs, their top defender. No, they did beat Oregon State last week, but again, or a couple weeks ago, but then again, everybody beats Oregon State. So Cal needs one more win, either at Stanford on Saturday night or at UCLA on Friday for bowl eligibility. So 2 road games, not going to be easy for Cal. And if UCLA loses and Cal loses, then the winner of Cal UCLA goes to a bowl. The loser gets shut out. That game, I'm probably going to stay away from, to tell you the truth. But Stanford's clearly the better team. And then Utah, Washington. Washington right now in a bit of trouble. Things were looking really good for them not too long ago. Oh, they're definitely going to go at least to the Pac-12 championship game. But now all of a sudden they're 2-2 in their last 4. So the way that the Pac-12 championship now is set, again, USC, they're going to be sitting there waiting for somebody. Now, if Washington State, who was off this week, if they beat Washington next week, okay, it doesn't matter what anything else happens. Washington State will play USC in the bowl game. I mean, in the championship game. And actually, that's what I'm leaning towards. That would be my best guess right now today. I think we're going to see Washington State beating Washington next week, no matter what Washington does to Utah. And I would expect Washington to beat Utah. It's a 17-point spread. They've won all 5 home games, Washington. They're very tough to beat at home. They've covered 4 of those 5 home games. A lot of big spreads, too. They just dominate teams at home. Keep this in mind, though. The dog in the series with Utah is 3-1 outright in the last 4 games since they've played, I think, in those 4 games since 2011. Now, Utah, who's the 17-point dog in this game, they've lost 5 out of 6. I mean, this is not normal for Kyle Whittingham. Now, you knew that they were going to have a drop-off this year, Utah. No question about that. You kind of figured, okay, maybe a mini kind of rebuild. But no, nobody thought that they would be 5-5, losers of 5 out of 6 after the start that they got off to. But it is what it is. Things have just not, what it is, really, the main thing, they don't have that big-time power rushing game that it always seemed like Kyle Whittingham's able to get. A lot of times he go out, gets these JC running backs. He just doesn't have one. Nobody dominant right now to lead that running attack, and that's really hurt them. They lost a lot of starters from last year's team as well. So like I said, not a big surprise they're in the situation they're in. They do host Colorado next week, and I would expect they would win that game and then sneak into a bowl anyway. But I don't think that dog thing He's going to hold, well, look, 3 out of 4 wins, 4 straight covers. Maybe Utah can cover. I don't know. It's a big spread, but Washington should be able to handle that. Now, here's the thing. If Washington beats Washington State, all right, and then you take a look at the situation with Stanford. Now, Stanford would need to beat California. Okay, so Stanford, if they beat California, let me see how I have this here again, because I went over this on Monday and I'm looking over my notes. This is the only conference, by the way, I have my notes all scribbled. So let's just go into the scenario that just for Washington first. Okay, I don't want to jump the gun on Stanford. Okay, Washington has to beat Utah and Washington State. Now, I just said Washington State only has to beat Washington. That's the fact. But for Washington, all right, let's say they beat Utah. They're expected to beat Utah. Then they beat Washington State. Now, that doesn't mean they're in, because Stanford just beat Washington. Stanford would have to lose to Cal. Okay? So, for Stanford, in order for them to get in, they need to beat California on Saturday, and then have Washington beat Washington State. All right, so this does not look good right now for Washington. Right now, it's looking very good for Washington State. You beat Washington, you're in, you win. Washington beats Washington State, Stanford's going to be in, as long as Stanford beats Cal. All right, so just wanted to double check my notes there, but that's my scribbly notes, and I definitely think after I figured it out, I made pretty good sense there. All right, now let's go to the Big Ten. Now the big game, of course, is Wisconsin and Michigan, and I do believe I put my futures report, by the way, up at PrimeSportsNetwork.com, and I do have Wisconsin making it to the playoffs. I said this on Monday. I think Wisconsin's going to win out. They'll play Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, and then they're going to beat Ohio State. So I'm going to have undefeated Wisconsin make it to the Final Four. They're a 7.5-point favorite against Michigan. Michigan is my favorite team, so full disclosure, in case you're a new listener. And even though that's the case, I still believe Wisconsin is going to win and cover the game. I don't like the fact that Michigan, inexperience on offense. Higdon's banged up. He's been their top offensive player for the last several weeks since Peters has taken over at quarterback. I don't have the Rutgers, Minnesota, Maryland wins meaning much when you have to go to Wisconsin and play the Badgers, especially that defense, the way they looked last week. They've really started to gear things up. Don't forget, we also, and we do have it on demand, so we want to let everybody know this. We had an interview earlier this week from Ben Wargle of Badger Nation talking about the game, and he said, look, the one game that bothered the Wisconsin kids more than any other game was the Michigan loss last year. So they're going to be up for that game. Look, that game they played last year was the first time Michigan and Wisconsin had played since 2010. So Wisconsin hasn't had a chance to beat Michigan in a while. Here you go. Here's your chance. Home opportunity. Big game. Last home game for seniors before you go, because they're going to go to the Big Ten championship game no matter what. Now, for Michigan, their chances for a Big Ten championship are pretty slim to none. They'd have to beat both Wisconsin and Ohio State, which, by the way, is actually the easy part. Then they're going to need Michigan State and Penn State to lose once each. That's the hard part because of the schedule those two teams play. So the chances of that happen are very minuscule. I don't think it's going to happen anyway. I wouldn't be shocked if Michigan beat Ohio State. But I think they're going to have a tougher time beating Wisconsin. Again, that defense, the way it's going, even though they're banged up, and we did talk about that the other day as well, this is a banged up Wisconsin team, but they still have the big-time running back, Jonathan Taylor. And that defense going up against a young, inexperienced starter in Peters, a lot of inexperienced players on both sides of the ball, especially offense. You would suspect this is going to be a defensive war between these two teams, either two of the top defensive teams in all of college football. But I'll take Wisconsin and give the 7. All right, now Ohio State's got the Big Ten Eastern Division sewn up because all they got to do is beat Illinois, 39-point favorite. So that's done. So they win and they knock out Penn State and Michigan State already. So you see, they're all pretty much, it's Ohio State. That's why Ohio State is pretty much all locked in to playing in the Big Ten championship game against Wisconsin. Speaking of Michigan State, Penn State, big favorite over Nebraska. Nebraska's got to win the last two to get bowl eligibility. That's not going to happen. And Michigan State, Maryland. Maryland has to do the same thing, and that's not going to happen. Michigan State, home finale, 16-point favorite in that one. I would suspect Michigan State and Penn State should have no problem in those games. I do want you to take a look at the three games that I think could be three upsets. Rutgers at Indiana. Rutgers has covered 5 straight games this year. They're playing their best football of the year. Indiana's 0-6-1 against the spread in their last 7 games. Rutgers and Indiana both need to win their last 2 for bowl eligibility. So the winner of this game will go into the last week with a win, and they're in. Indiana will be at Purdue next week, and Rutgers will be hosting Michigan State next week. But Rutgers, surprisingly, is an 11-point dog in this game. See, to me, this game should be 3 or 4 points. And then, you know what? I'd stay away from this game. But 11? I mean, I can get almost 3-1 odds on the money line and taking this game. This is an even pick game. I mean, sorry, but I think this is an easy game to take Rutgers as far as an upset. I'm not saying it's an easy game for Rutgers to win. I'm just saying this is an easy upset choice. Now, I do like Minnesota to possibly upset Northwestern. I rarely go against Pat Fitzgerald in these situations. I've rolled with Northwestern for the past several weeks, and they've won and covered each time. They've won 5 straight. They're playing their best football of the year and all that. But they aren't playing for anything. I mean, this game means nothing except one thing, and it's kind of important, but it's the last home game and all for seniors. But Minnesota, they have to win this game because next week they play at Wisconsin. And if they don't win this game, then they got to beat Wisconsin for bowl eligibility. So this is a big game for them. Now, they haven't won a game on the road yet in the Big Ten, so that's a problem. Even though the win last week against Nebraska, I think, can kind of get their offense going. Also, I'm a PJ Fleck believer. So I think if you're thinking about rolling the dice for an upset, why not roll it here? I like Rutgers more, even though Rutgers is a higher spread. But I think Minnesota is not a bad idea. And I also think Purdue is not a bad idea. Even though Purdue has lost 4 to 5, they would need to win their last 2. Beat Iowa this week, and then next week at home against Indiana. So this is the tough part. Now, Blau's out, the quarterback, of course. Their leading rushers out. That's coincided with the losing. So that definitely concerns me. No question about it. The reason I'm willing to give Purdue a shot here, similar to Minnesota, I like Rutgers, by the way, is the best upset in this division on Saturday. But the reason I'm willing to give Purdue a shot here is I just think after the loss last week, demoralizing, beat up, emotionally spent after the last couple of weeks, playing a game that means absolutely nothing to them. I think maybe you could see a little bit of a letdown here from Iowa against a team playing for their season. Even though, just like Northwestern, it is going to be senior day, so keep that in mind. Both Northwestern and Iowa are 7.5-point favorites. Okay, so that's the Big Ten. Let's move over to the SEC. And you have a few things here we want to go over. Arkansas needs to win their last 2 for bowl eligibility. Yet I don't see that happening. They're 0-5-1 against the spread at home this year. That is terrible. Mississippi State's their opponent. Why wouldn't I take Mississippi State even as a 13-point favorite? The way they looked last week, Arkansas has been terrible this year. They're not going to a bowl. Auburn, by the way, will play Louisiana Monroe this week. Alabama's got Mercer this week, so they set that up perfectly before their big game next, which will decide so much. We talked, by the way, this week, also on demand, with Ryan Fowler, Alabama radio host covering the Tide. That's available on demand, as is our interview with Brian Matthews, who covers Auburn football. So he's a writer covering Auburn football. So we were able to digest the big matchup and learn a lot about Auburn and Alabama this week before the game next week. Auburn, 36-point favorite. 32-point favorite in this spot last year to Monroe, and they won by 51. You know what? I think, even though I think Monroe, as I've said before, is a team to keep an eye on in the Sun Belt in the next couple of years, This situation, they're probably in big trouble. I would expect Auburn's going to want to win this game and get it over early. Wouldn't be surprised if the score was similar to what happened last year. Even though you would expect a little bit of a letdown, but I think Auburn knows what's going on here and how important it is to just get this game over with. Now, Georgia's a 21-point favorite against Kentucky, and they've beaten Kentucky 7 straight times. Georgia's the better team here. The question's only going to be, are they going to, because of the punch they took last week, psychologically, will it cripple them in this game? Because I think we're going to learn a lot about Georgia this week. I think. See, I'm if I'm taking the game, I'm taking Georgia. I don't know if I'm going to take the game though, because look, I am a little bit concerned about the punch they took. Kentucky's actually been a better team as a dog this year than they have been when you're expecting them to win a game, especially at home. But when they played their toughest road opponent this year, Kentucky, they got crushed at Mississippi State. So I would tend to think that Georgia will buy the second half, get on a little bit of a roll, put Kentucky away. I would lean towards Georgia in this one as a 21-point favorite, but we will learn, I think, enough about Georgia in this one even to know whether or not they have what it takes to come back in a few weeks and beat either Auburn or Alabama, especially if it's Auburn. Now, you knew I was going to take Alabama-Birmingham after the way that we have talked up Alabama-Birmingham this season. Not only have, of course, we talked up Alabama-Birmingham, but we did it, and we've done it because of what a great story it is, of course. But we also had Steve Irvine on the show from Blazers 247, I think it was about a month ago, and Birmingham just keeps on rolling. They're 7-3. They've lost only 2 games since opening day by a total of 4 points. They've covered 7 out of 8 games. They're playing a Florida team that I've gone against for the past 4 or 5 games. Yeah, because they've dropped 4 straight covers, lost 5 straight games. I mean, this team is just damaged beyond belief. Plus, you got the game next week at home against Florida State to look to. They're not going to a bowl, so forget that. They're only a 10-point favorite. I mean, you look at this and you go, I'm sure the outside person that doesn't pay attention to the Conference USA might go, what is that? I know Florida's playing bad, but what? But you know what? I still take Alabama-Birmingham on the money line in that one. I would. I mean, you got 2 teams going in way opposite directions emotionally and psychologically. Why wouldn't I take Alabama-Birmingham in that one? All right, LSU is playing Tennessee. First game without Butch Jones. We told you 2 years ago, that Tennessee should have fired Butch Jones. All right. So as usual, you listen to this network, you pay attention to what we say here, and a lot of times we're going to get it right early in the process. And you know what? When we say things like that, we know it's going to take a while. I know it. Usually, especially in coaching situations, whenever we'll say somebody should get fired, it usually takes the team a whole extra year before they decide, let's fire the guy. Well, Butch Jones should have been fired last year. The guy is just, he followed in Brian Kelly's footsteps. That's all he's ever done. Now, I don't know if they can get Lane Kiffin. I think that'd be a great story. I would love that if Lane Kiffin went to Tennessee. I think Tennessee is a program that is really worthy of a really good coach right now, and it would be great for the SEC to have Tennessee playing good football again. But I don't know. I don't know what the situation is. Brady Hoke takes over, so I don't, for at least for now. So I don't know. I know Brady Hoke being from my Michigan days, and he ain't very good either. By the way, Tennessee is 0-6 this year versus SEC teams. LSU, meanwhile, 4-1 in their last 5. They've covered 4 straight. Don't forget they beat Auburn, and they had that tough loss on the road to Alabama. It's a 15-point spread here. I'll take LSU. I think Tennessee is just they're gone. All right. Also, Missouri. We are trying to hook up. Hopefully, we'll be able to hook up later today. It's either going to be on the meeting room later today or next week with Dave Matter. He is a Missouri athletics beat writer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. We're going to talk to him about what's going on with the Tigers because we've talked them up the last couple of weeks with Dave Odom doing a fantastic job. He has turned that program around. Barry Odom has turned that program around after some losing earlier this season. It looked like the team was just awful. I even said it earlier this season. I said Barry Odom's in trouble. Barry Odom's going to get fired. And Barry Odom came out and had this speech, and he got everybody psyched up, and boy, did it work. They've won 4 straight by a 215 to 66 margin. They've covered 6 straight games. We've gone with them the last several weeks. We're going to go with them again. Now, this Vanderbilt game is kind of confusing to me because Vanderbilt, I told you that I like Vanderbilt after the way they ended the season last year. Derek Mason looked like he was doing a good job. A lot of guys coming back this year. Looked like things were on the uptick. And they started off okay. Then all of a sudden, that game against Alabama when they lost 59-0, everybody was like, what happened? This isn't the old Vanderbilt. Well, they're 1-6 in their last 7, 1-5-1 ATS last 7. That Alabama game started the losing. And so you got one team losing, one team winning. Missouri favored by 8 in this spot. By the way, Missouri is not even bowl eligible yet. Next week, they're going to be at Arkansas, so I expect Missouri to win their last 2. Vanderbilt needs to beat Missouri this week and then beat Tennessee next week for bowl eligibility. Now, keep in mind, there will possibly be a team or two that will have a shot at getting into a bowl with 5 wins, and I mention that because Vanderbilt could be one of those schools because the smartest schools get that privilege. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, I like Missouri. I'm just going to keep rolling with them. And maybe we'll talk Missouri football in the meeting room later. All right, that's the SEC. Let's go to the Big 12. Big story coming out with Kenny Hill not going to play in this game against Texas Tech. Now, I haven't noticed any significant line changes, over the last few days, which I'm surprised about. Maybe I'll have to look again. I don't know. But Kenny Hill is not playing in this game. There hasn't been a full disclosure yet of why. Sean Robinson, the true freshman, gets the start. Now, he's their top true freshman prospect, so you need to keep that in mind, Sean Robinson. Now, Robinson played a lot more in the first week of the season against Jackson State. He went 5 for 7 in that game, or 7 for 10 or something. But then he only threw a couple more passes the rest of the year. So we really haven't seen him at all most of the season. And now he's got to go ahead and try to win this game. They're in trouble now, TCU, because if TCU beats Texas Tech and then Baylor, which all of a sudden, even next week's off, because you got a true freshman possibly playing in these games, anything can happen. Or maybe Sean Robinson comes out there like Khalil Tate, and he's better than Kenny Hill. Nobody knows. This is the thing that you just don't know. So, see, I'm willing to say I'm going to take Texas Tech. I'm going to take the money line. I'm going to go for the full right upset. But I'm only doing that just because you don't know. And because nobody knows, to me, it's a flip of the coin, and I'll take the money line. Why not? Why wouldn't I roll the dice on that? But we don't know. So I don't know. Nobody knows. Texas Tech snapped their 4-game losing streak last week in the win over Baylor. They still need to get a win for bowl eligibility. If they don't beat TCU this week, they got to play Texas on Friday, and that might be for a bowl because Texas plays West Virginia, and if they don't beat West Virginia Saturday, then they need to win next week against Texas Tech. Now, the West Virginia game means a lot for West Virginia because West Virginia, who's tied with Oklahoma State TCU, a game back of Oklahoma, can still play in the Big 12 championship game. Now, they're going to need a lot of help. I mean, they're going to need Texas Tech, first of all, to beat TCU. And then they're probably going to need Kansas State to beat Oklahoma. Well, not probably, but they will. They're going to need Kansas State to beat Oklahoma State as well. Kansas State, 20-point dog because of the injury situations at quarterback. It still doesn't look good for Zach Ertz. Kansas State, if they don't win this week, they got to beat Iowa State next week, or they don't go to a bowl. Oklahoma State in a much better situation, though, if TCU loses. All right, because remember, TCU is in the driver's seat here. If they win their 2, they play Oklahoma more than likely because we would suspect Oklahoma will win their next 2, even though they still have to play at West Virginia next week. But if TCU slips up, Oklahoma State beat Kansas State on Saturday, then all they got to do is beat Kansas next week, and we'll have a Bedlam rematch for the inaugural Big 12 championship game. Of course, Oklahoma is a huge favorite at Kansas this week as well. Iowa State's at Baylor, and they're a 9-point favorite, which is, by the way, Kemp, I hear, is supposed to be ready to play. And if he is, then I don't know why he wouldn't start. But then again, I was very confused by the play calling in the game last week from Matt Campbell. So Who knows what's going to happen there? Bottom line is, nothing is set yet in the Big 12, and that especially means if something were to happen, like Oklahoma were to lose next week in Morgantown, then everything all of a sudden it goes crazy. But the big story in the Big 12 right now is Kenny Hill will not be starting in the game against Texas Tech, so you want to keep that in mind. In the ACC, Miami looking for a 10-0 start, 19-point favorite over Virginia. Virginia now bowl eligible, so they don't have to sweat or anything like that. But this is probably, of course, asking a lot for the Cavs. Miami, meanwhile, you wonder, do they come back down to life at all? They're already going to be in the ACC championship game, but we all know that they're playing for a national championship now, so this is very important. But do they get off to a slow start? Does it resemble one of those games that they had earlier this season where 3 or 4 straight weeks they were winning in the final second? I mean, anything's possible. We don't know. This is uncharted territory for Mark Richt in this program, but we would suspect Miami, if they play a good game, should be able to romp in this one. Now, Miami's going to play at Pitt next week on Friday. Now, Pitt needs to win 2 games for bowl eligibility, so it starts with Virginia Tech this week. Now, I don't mind taking Pitt this week as a 16-point dog because the dog in this series has won 3 out of 5 the last 5 years, and Pitt has been the dog in all 3 wins. So Pitt's beaten Virginia Tech 3 times in the last 5 years as a dog. So maybe they can make it 4. I also think Virginia Tech might be in one of those situations where even though it's senior day, maybe they're a little bit, damaged. They get beat by Miami. They lose at Georgia Tech. There might be something that they're dealing with right now. Whereas Pitt, of course, comes in here, even though you lose to North Carolina, and that's not good. I'm not trying to sit here and tell you this is a great play or anything, but I'm just saying, maybe based on that trend and the fact that we don't know about Virginia Tech psyche. Now, Syracuse, Dungy is kind of dealing with a foot injury, so you want to keep that in mind. Syracuse needs to beat Louisville this week and Boston College next week for a bowl. They've been playing better than anybody thought they would play. We've talked about that. 6-1-1 ATS last 8. Louisville, final home game, more than likely for Lamar Jackson. So keep that in mind. 13-point favorite in this one. Look, if Dungy doesn't play, Louisville is going to destroy him. If he does play, I'd probably take Syracuse in this one. I think they can make this competitive. Louisville has destroyed Syracuse, though, the last 3 years by a 131-51 margin. Georgia Tech's a 6.5-point favorite at Duke. I like the Jackets in that one. The reason, they're 7-1-1 ATS this season. They need a win for bowl eligibility. And next week, they get Georgia. So you think they want to win this week? Plus Duke, 0-6 straight up, 0-5-1 ATS in their last 6. Duke needs to win this week and at Wake next week for a bowl. I suspect Georgia Tech's the one that gets the bowl this week. BC, UConn, keep in mind, Brown's out, the quarterbacks for BC. That happened before last week's game, though. But just to keep in mind, so I don't think it matters much. They didn't get much out of their quarterback position. This was the running team. They're 6-0-1 ATS last 7, BC, though. They need to win at UConn to get bowl eligibility. I suspect they'll do that. By the way, this game's at Fenway Park. All right, so keep that. That might be interesting to watch. UConn has, even though they've lost 3 straight, they have covered 4 to 5. So it does look a little like maybe they're starting to, I don't know. They got a long process of turning things around there, but Randy Edsall, I think he'll get it done. I really do. But it does look like maybe they're starting to play a little bit better. BC, by the way, beat UConn 30-0 last year. It was their first meeting since 2004. NC State Wake. This is a game I want to watch in the ACC because these 2 teams are up-and-coming programs. Dave Claus is doing a fantastic job at Wake. They have scored 143 points in their last 3 games, 2 of those wins. One was that loss at Notre Dame. NC State, of course, we've talked about the great season it's been for the Wolfpack. We did that on the OFN meeting room a few weeks ago with Joe Giglio from the News Observer. And this is only about a 1-point spread. Wake, the home favorite. NC State has beaten up Wake the last 3 years by 110-46. I think Wake's going to get a little bit of revenge here. I'm going to go ahead and take the Demon Deacons in that one. Let's move on quickly through the other smaller conferences. and then we'll let you know about their bowl situations in the AAC, the Athletic, the Atlantic, the Athletic. Now the New Year's Six bowl game is going to come from here. Okay, it's probably going to come down to Central Florida and Memphis. Now Central Florida is at Temple on Saturday. As I said the other day, Central Florida can lose this game to Temple, beat South Florida next week, and they're in the AAC championship game. So this game means only one thing for Central Florida, that they want to have a little bit more of a feeling that they're going to be that Bowl of Six team. But because chances are the New Year's Six bowl game team could and will come from this conference, because I think it will. Now, I think there's a chance. I think if there's another team that probably does have a chance, it's Boise. I think Boise's a team that, because they've been playing pretty well over the last several weeks. They had the big come from behind win last week. I mean, what are they on, a 6-game winning streak or something like that? So I do think Boise has a shot as well. But it's kind of looking like more than likely, unless Central Florida loses to Temple. All right. See, I think if Central Florida is going to get the bid if they win out. That's just not even a debate. But I also think if Memphis wins out, because they play SMU on Saturday, I suspect they'll win the game. They're a 12-point favorite. They win, they clinch the West, and then Memphis will play the winner of Central Florida, South Florida. So, look, that would make them 9-1. Now, if Memphis goes into that championship game, because they're going to beat East Carolina too. So if they go in at 10-1, and even Central Florida say they go in at 10-1, let's even say they lose one this week, the Temple say, well, the winner is going to be 11-1, and then the winner is going to wind up, in that Bowl of Six. So that's how it's going to work. So I think it would take a lot of losing by these teams to open things up for another team outside the AAC. But I think Temple's got a shot as an upset here. 14-point home dog. They've won their last couple of games, including a win over Navy a couple of weeks ago. So now, if they don't win this game, they got to beat Tulsa next week for a bowl. This is their final home game. They have beaten Central Florida the last couple of years. They beat them last year on a last-second touchdown pass, 1 second to go, and they beat Central Florida. So there is a little bit of a revenge thing here for the Knights. So that does come into play. But keep this in mind, too. The Knights are 0-3-1 against the spread in their last 4 games. So maybe Temple doesn't win, but they cover, keep it close. They've covered 5 out of 6. I could see that happening. I don't think it's a bad idea to roll the dice, though, straight up on the money line. But then you got Memphis. I also like Memphis given 12 against SMU. Now, I think SMU's dangerous. They've lost their last 2 by a total of 10 points to good teams, Central Florida and Navy. But I don't know. I mean, you wonder about having to deal with those really tough losses, including last week. Maybe that catches up to them. They're already bowl eligible. Memphis has won the last 3 years against SMU by a 162-17 margin. So they have owned this program. They're also on a 5-game winning streak. They're 4-0-1 ATS last 5. That's Memphis. And their only loss this season was the game against Central Florida on the road. So I suspect we get a rematch in the AAC championship game between Memphis and Central Florida, because I have said all year that I think Central Florida is going to win the AAC, and I still do. But I think it'll be but I think they'll have to get through Memphis first. Okay, now Navy, Abby may not play in the game against Notre Dame. Now that's big because Malcolm Perry played last week against SMU. They ran for 559 yards with the backup Perry, who threw 1 pass. So you want to keep that in mind when thinking about this game, because they're not going to be able to do that against Notre Dame. They're going to need Abby. Now, Notre Dame is a 17-point favorite. I would think that Notre Dame, after what happened last week, this could be a hiccup situation. All right, maybe it takes a half, 3/4 for them to get into it kind of deal. But I still want to see Abby out there if I'm taking Navy. Maybe it helps Notre Dame that they lost to Navy last year. Maybe that happens to get them going. But I don't think Navy's a bad play here at all, especially even the money line. I don't think they're a bad play. I could definitely see a hangover situation for the Irish, but I'd want Abbey to play. And I also think Tulane's not a bad upset play as a 10-point dog at home against Houston. They needed to win their last two for bowl eligibility. I'm a big Willie Fritz fan. Give him another couple of years. He's going to turn that Tulane program around. But Tulane still has work to do. They have to beat Houston and then beat SMU next week. Okay, Mountain West Conference. And the big one you want to watch is Fresno and Wyoming. And another one of our meeting room interviews that's available on demand. We had Robert Gagliardi, who writes for a couple of Wyoming newspapers covering the Cowboys. So that's available. Mark Marion, the quarterback for Fresno, is a little banged up. So definitely keep an eye on that. Because if he doesn't play, you go all in on Wyoming. Fresno's a 2-point favorite in this game. I like the way Wyoming's playing right now, though. I think that now you do have to worry about Josh Allen, too. Okay. He's also dealing with a little bit of an injury situation. So definitely watch the two quarterbacks in this game. But if they both play, I still kind of feel Wyoming is on a nice little run. We've taken them the last few weeks. They've converted one. But in order for now, look, they're not going to get into the MWC championship game because Boise is going to wrap that up. All the Boise has to do is beat Air Force, and it's over. Fresno, though, they can't lose these two games. See, if they win 1 out of 2, they beat Wyoming. That's it. Fresno will play in the championship game against Boise. Ironically, Fresno plays Boise next week. So if Fresno loses to Wyoming, then Fresno has to beat Boise next week to play Boise the following week. If you could figure all that out. Wyoming has won 6 out of 7. Fresno's won 6 out of 7. But you know what Wyoming's done? They've covered 7 straight. So that's why I'm kind of leaning a little bit towards Wyoming in this spot, especially that they're at home getting 3. But either way, this should be a good game. Fun game for a couple of under-the-radar Mountain West Conference teams that are both in it right now for championship, especially Fresno State. I do think that UNLV is not a bad roll of the dice tonight. They're a 3-point road dog in New Mexico. The Lobos have lost 5 straight. UNLV, if they win tonight, they'd have to win next week at Nevada for a bowl. Utah State, I like them against Hawaii. Hawaii's 0-7-1 against the spread in their last 8. And Boise, by the way, okay, in the game against Air Force has beaten Boise 3 straight times, all as dogs. They've covered 5 straight against Boise, and they're a 17-point dog in this spot. But Boise has won 6 straight, covered 5 out of 6, had the big miraculous onside kick comeback last week against Colorado State. They're on a huge roll. This is the best roll I've seen them on in a few years. Air Force needs to win their last 2 for a bowl. This game and then Utah State next week. So I don't know. I think one or two things happened. I don't see Air Force covering unless they win. I think either Boise wins, even though I'm going against another trend here. I think, or maybe Air Force shocks them again. But I'm going to go ahead and roll with Boise, and maybe Boise blows them out. And San Diego State plays Nevada, 16-point favorite. San Diego State can still play Boise in a rematch for the championship if they win their last 2, which they more than likely will. They have 2 weak opponents coming up. And Fresno loses their last 2, which is not crazy to think about with Fresno's schedule. Conference USA. We like Middle Tennessee tonight against Western Kentucky. Stockstill's back at quarterback. Had a 3-touchdown performance last week. They need a win for bowl eligibility. Western Kentucky needs a win for bowl eligibility, but they've lost 3 straight. They're only 2-8 against the spread. This is not the same team since Braum has left. By the way, if they lose this week, they'll be at FIU next week for a chance for a bowl. Army and North Texas is a very intriguing game here. Army from the Independents is on a 6-game winning streak. They've got the Navy game on December 9th, and their season's up. North Texas is won 6 out of 7, and North Texas upset Army last year on the road as a 17-point dog. Then, as a 10-point dog in the bowl game against Army, lost to them in overtime, but they covered that game too. Now, if North Texas wins at Rice, and Rice is pretty bad, next week, North Texas will play in the Conference USA Championship game against, more than likely, FAU. And we're going to roll again with FAU on Saturday. And another team that we have been high on, this is the Lane Kiffin team. And we had a nice interview. It was, I think, probably about a month ago. Yeah, I think about a month ago with Chuck King from FAUOwlaccess.com. I believe it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now, the home team in the FAU-FIU Kiffin-Butch Davis matchup has won 4 straight and 6 out of 7. Even though, now it's a 14-point spread, you might be going, oh, rivalry game. But 3 of the last 4 of these games have been decided by 14 or more. So I'll roll with FAU as a 14-point home favorite. They've won 6 straight games. And that's it. They win this game, they're in the championship game. And if somehow they lose, they beat Charlotte next week, they're in the championship game. So FAU will be in the championship game, and more than likely against North Texas. All right. And by the way, another game I wanted to mention from the Independents and the Mountain West. No, Independent matchup, excuse me. UMass at BYU. We're going to take UMass as a 5-point dog in this one, because a couple of reasons. I just think UMass has actually played a pretty good season. BYU's a little bit better than they were, only because they got a shot in the arm from a true freshman quarterback, Joe Critchlow, in the win against UNLV. It wasn't Critchlow the reason they won, though. Canada had over 200 yards rushing. But UMass has been in a lot of close games this year. All 7 of their losses this year have been by 11 or less. They've won 3 out of 4. BYU beat them up last year, 51-9. I think UMass might get a little bit of revenge there. I just figured I'd throw that in there. And then quickly in the Sun Belt, the one game I do want to mention, 2 games I want to mention, the Idaho-Coastal Carolina game, both quarterbacks are out. That includes Matt Linehan for Idaho. And New Mexico State we like as a 4-point favorite at Lafayette. And you know we like this team all season. If they get 2 more wins out of the last 3 games, the Aggies, they will, and by the way, they get Idaho and South Alabama at home after this. So 2 wins out of the next 3. They will be in their first bowl since 1960. Now, we will talk to John Wagner, a sports writer for Toledo Blade, on Monday at 1 o'clock on the meeting room. And when we do, we're going to talk about the MAC. The MAC loves to play their games during the week, so all the big games are over already. And remember, on Monday, we told you to keep an eye on Akron, Ohio, because if Akron upset Ohio, Akron would be in the driver's seat, and they did. Cato Nelson, the redshirt freshman, had a tremendous game, had over 300 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. They beat Ohio. So Akron now, if they beat pretty terrible Kent State, which we would suspect they will, that game's on Tuesday, so we'll preview that on Monday with John Wagner. Then Akron and Terry Bowden will win the East, so of the MAC. And then they will wind up playing Toledo more than likely, because Toledo blew out Bowling Green, and Toledo beats Western Michigan next Friday. Toledo will play Akron if Akron beats Kent. Now, if Toledo were to lose to Western Michigan, then Northern Illinois would then have a shot to get in as long as they win at Central Michigan. Now, those games are not easy games for Toledo and Northern Illinois, but games that you would suspect that they would be able to win nonetheless. We'll talk about it on Monday. All right, so that has wrapped it up here for our coverage for Week 12 on OFN college football. We hope you enjoyed all of that information that we were able to throw your way for another week's worth of college football. Now, we're not sure yet if we're going to have an OFN meeting room a little bit later on. As I mentioned, if we do, we will always tweet it out and let you know. So follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN, and that's when we'll let you know exactly what to look out for and where to find the shows and where they'll be available. on demand, and of course that's going to be at the Ourlads Football Network webpage. We want to thank Robert Gagliardi covering Wyoming football, Ben Wargol, Badger Nation covering Wisconsin, Ryan Fowler for Alabama, Ryan Matthews for Auburn, and of course Ryan Abraham for joining us today and talking USC football this week on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. And we'll see you next time on the Ourlads Football Radio Network, where it's never too early to think about the NFL Draft.